healer could calm the Alpha King's dying wolf, until rejected Omega touched him and he claimed her. In the heart of this realm stood the great fortress of Valor, home to the Alpha King, Kale, a warrior whose name was spoken in awe and fear alike. Tales of his strength reached even the farthest villages, yet behind the iron gates and towering walls, Kale was a man crumbling beneath a curse that no healer could undo. The curse had been cast in his youth, a cruel twist of fate meant to test the limits of his power. His body had endured countless battles, and his mind had commanded legions. But now, even the simplest motion left him breathless, as if the very life within him was slipping like sand through fingers. He walked the halls of Valor like a shadow of his former glory, his once bright eyes clouded with pain. Word had spread across the kingdom. No healer, no priest, no mage could ease his suffering. And yet Kale did not surrender. The fire in him burned still, though it flickered dangerously against the darkness threatening to consume him. It was in the forests at the edge of his hunting grounds that fate wove the first thread of change. Lyra, a young Omega from a distant clan, wandered there under the guise of solitude. She had been rejected by her people for her gift, a rare and feared power to touch and soothe the pain of others. Her hands, delicate and pale, carried warmth and an unspoken magic, though she had been warned to hide it. Lyra's journey to Eldrin had been one of necessity and fear. She had no home to return to, no clan to protect her. The winds of the forest whispered to her as if guiding her forward, and the silence was both companion and caution. She moved with quiet steps, careful not to disturb the life that thrived unseen among the trees. Kale, meanwhile, had ridden into the forest under a pretense of hunting, though his eyes were distant, haunted. His body ached, a slow, relentless pain that no salve could touch. He leaned on his staff as he moved, each step a battle against his own flesh, and the howl of the wind seemed to echo the wolf within him, the cursed wolf that had always lingered at the edge of his soul. It was Lyra's presence, however fleeting, that drew him. He had felt it first in the air, a softness, a strange warmth that called to a part of him long buried beneath his pride and suffering. And when he saw her, standing at the edge of a sun-dappled clearing, his breath caught. She did not startle at his approach, though the wolf in him had the urge to growl, to mark, to claim. Instead, she looked at him with quiet curiosity, a steady gaze that neither trembled nor begged. Kale's hand trembled as he reached toward her, but it was Lyra who stepped forward. She hesitated, then gently placed her palm against his arm. The moment her skin touched his, a ripple of something impossible moved through him. The pain that had clawed at his chest and bones for years eased, if only for a heartbeat. Kale's eyes widened. How? His voice was hoarse, unsteady, as if the words themselves were a struggle. Lyra shook her head softly. "I don't know," she whispered. Her hands, warm and alive, seemed to pull something from the darkness that lived in him, something he had not known could be freed. The world around them seemed to pause. Birds fell silent and the wind ceased its whispering. Only the two of them existed in that forest glade, bound by an invisible thread of magic and destiny. You feel it too," Kale said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. The wolf in him stirred, sensing her strength, her calm, her fearlessness. He had lived his life in command of armies, in dominion over men and beasts alike. Yet here, in the presence of this rejected Omega, he felt powerless. But in the most astonishing way, it was not unpleasant. Lyra's heart pounded. She had feared kings, warriors, the powerful and the proud. But Kale was different. He was not merely powerful. He was broken, and that brokenness called to the parts of her that had long been ignored, the parts that understood pain and longing. "Why are you here?" Kale asked, his voice quieter now, almost intimate, as if the forest itself demanded restraint. I don't belong anywhere," she admitted. "And yet, perhaps I was meant to find you." Her words trembled, not with fear but with truth. Kale stepped closer, his towering frame both imposing and protective. The wolf within him snarled softly, a warning he could not fully control, and yet he did not step back. He had spent his life keeping everyone at a distance, but this girl, this Omega, had touched something no sword, no crown, no magic could reach. The part of him that still remembered warmth, trust, and hope. For hours they remained there, the forest around them fading into a blur of shadows and light. Kale tried to speak, tried to understand what had happened, but words failed him. Lyra only smiled faintly, her presence a balm, her touch a promise of a future he had not dared imagine. The wind shifted suddenly, bringing with it the scent of danger. Kale stiffened, his instincts alert. Though the forest seemed peaceful, he knew that the world beyond these trees was never kind. Rivals, enemies, and those who coveted power would see him weakened and strike. And if they discovered the Omega, the girl who had touched him, her life would be at risk. "You must leave," Kale said, his voice low but urgent. "If they find you here, it will not end well." Lyra shook her head. "I will not run, not from you, not from this." Her words were fierce in their quietness, defiant against the weight of destiny pressing down on them both. Kale's hand hovered near hers, unsure whether to reach for her again or to pull away, torn between desire and caution. The wolf within him growled softly, impatient, hungry, aware of the connection that had been sparked. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in deep twilight. Shadows lengthened, wrapping the clearing in darkness. Kale knew he had to return to the castle before nightfall, yet he could not bring himself to let her go. You have awakened something in me," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of kings and curses alike. "And I do not know what to do with it." Lyra's eyes shimmered in the dim light. "Then do nothing," she said. "For now, let it be." Kale nodded, though his heart beat with a force that frightened him. Slowly, he turned and began the journey back to Valor, every step a struggle against his own failing strength. Yet, at the edge of the forest, he glanced back. Lyra was still there, a lone figure bathed in twilight, watching him with a steady gaze that promised neither retreat nor surrender. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Kale felt the stirrings of hope he had not felt in years. But he also knew that this encounter was only the beginning. The kingdom would not wait, the curse would not rest, and the bond he had forged with the Omega could become both his salvation and his undoing. And somewhere deep within him the wolf stirred, aware that its master had found something, or someone worth protecting, no matter the cost. The wind carried a whisper through the trees, a warning wrapped in the promise of fate. The world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again. Kale's breath caught as he glimpsed the horizon, where shadowy figures moved beyond the trees. Danger, ambition, and desire all converged on this moment, and he realized that the choice before him was no longer about survival. It was about trust, surrender, and a bond that might just save or destroy them both. With that thought, Kale tightened his grip on his staff, and the darkness of night fell over the forest, carrying with it the unspoken question. Would the Alpha King rise or fall? Because of the touch of a rejected Omega, the halls of Valor Castle were silent, save for the faint creak of ancient timber and the whisper of the wind through cracked stone. Kale, the Alpha King, moved slowly along the corridors, his mind restless, haunted by the memory of the Omega who had touched him in the forest. That single touch had stirred something in him, something he had not felt in years, warmth, hope, and an ache for connection. Yet the court had already begun to murmur. Whispers of Kale's weakness had spread like wildfire. Advisors, nobles, and distant relatives watched him carefully, waiting for signs of faltering, waiting to seize what power they could from a king whose body betrayed him. Kale felt the weight of the throne press against his shoulders, heavier than any armor, more painful than any battle wound. And still, he could not stop thinking of Lyra. Her presence haunted him, the gentle warmth of her hands, the quiet courage in her gaze. No spell, no healer, no sword could touch the darkness within him. but she had, and that realization both thrilled and terrified him. Lyra, for her part, had not returned to her old clan. She wandered through the twilight woods, thinking of Kale, thinking of the storm she had glimpsed in his eyes. She did not yet trust him fully. She had learned long ago that power often carried cruelty, even if hidden behind a noble mask. And Kale was power itself, wrapped in pain and pride, with a wolf lurking in the shadows of his soul. Yet the pull between them was undeniable. The bond created by her touch lingered, a quiet but unbreakable thread stretching across the distance. Lyra sensed that he was in danger, not from enemies alone but from himself, the wolf within him that grew restless with every moment of weakness. She could not abandon him. Days passed, and Kale summoned her to the castle under the guise of necessity. "You will stay," he commanded softly, though the tone carried neither anger nor demand. It was a statement of inevitability. "Until I know that you understand the weight of what has begun." Lyra hesitated, her instincts urging caution, but curiosity and an unspoken connection guided her steps. She entered the castle with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the grand hall, the banners, and the guards who seemed to notice her presence but dared not interfere. Kale awaited her in the central courtyard, the last rays of sunlight illuminating his sharp features, casting the shadows of a wolf upon his face. "You do not fear me?" he asked, his voice low, almost a murmur. "I fear what I do not understand," Lyra replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I do not yet understand you." Kale smiled faintly, a rare expression that softened the harsh angles of his face. "Then perhaps we are alike, you and I. Both misunderstood, both hunted by the weight of what we cannot change." For a moment, silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of the wind rustling through the courtyard. Kale studied her, trying to measure her courage, her honesty, and the strange light that seemed to radiate from her very being. The wolf inside him stirred, sensing her strength, her refusal to bow to fear. It growled softly in approval, yet also in warning. She was not to be taken lightly. Lyra, sensing the turmoil in him, stepped closer. "You do not have to fight this alone," she said softly. "I do not claim to heal you completely, but I can be here if you allow me." Kale's heart ached at her words. So few had offered him understanding without expectation. Most sought to use him, control him, or fear him. Lyra offered only presence. And yet the power in her gaze reminded him that bonds were not easily formed, and trust could not be commanded. Their days together unfolded in quiet moments, each filled with tension and unspoken emotion. Kale allowed her to sit near him in the grand library, where scrolls and tomes of forgotten magic lined the shelves. She read to him passages from ancient texts, her voice calm and melodic, soothing the unrest within him. Sometimes he would close his eyes, letting the words wash over him, imagining a life where he was not the Alpha King, where he was merely Kale, a man in search of peace. Yet the wolf within him grew restless. His strength was waning faster than he could hide, and the curse that had haunted him for so long pressed against the edges of his consciousness. Some nights, he would pace the halls, struggling to contain the animal that threatened to break free. Lyra, sensing his agitation even without words, would place her hand upon his arm. The touch was gentle, grounding, a tether to the man beneath the wolf. "I do not know how long this can last," Kale admitted one evening, his voice rough. "The curse, it is old and it is cunning. Every moment I remain myself is a battle. Every touch from you gives me strength, yet it is not enough to banish what I carry." Lyra's fingers traced a line along his wrist. "Then we fight together," she said simply. "You do not have to face the storm alone." Kale's eyes softened, but the fear in them was not gone. He knew that the bond they shared was dangerous. To be near her was to risk everything, not just his position as king, but the fragile control he held over the wolf within. And yet he could not bring himself to send her away. The court grew restless. Advisors whispered of Lyra's presence. of the rumors that a rejected Omega had touched the Alpha King and changed him. Some feared her, some despised her, and others saw an opportunity to manipulate the king through her. Kale ignored the whispers, but he could not ignore the glances of nobles and guards who watched too closely. One evening, as twilight bled into night, Kale and Lyra walked along the castle ramparts. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of distant forests and the promise of storms. They spoke little, yet the silence between them was heavy with unspoken emotion. Kale stopped, gazing at the horizon where shadows of the mountains stretched like claws. "There are those who would see you gone," he said quietly. "They do not understand what you mean to me, or perhaps they do and they fear it." Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I am not afraid of them," she said. "I am afraid only of losing what we have begun here. If I falter, if I leave, would you survive?" Kale's jaw tightened. "I do not know. The wolf inside me, it is not kind. It would take much from me, and yet, it would not take you, not if I can help it." Her hand found his again, the warmth and steadiness of her touch grounding him in a way nothing else could. For a moment he allowed himself to hope, to imagine a future where the curse did not define him, where the wolf and the man were one, and where she stood beside him, not as a tool, not as a healer, but as a partner. But the night was not silent for long. A shadow moved at the edge of the ramparts, unseen but sensed by Kale. The wolf stirred within him, muscles tensing, senses sharp. Danger lurked, not in the form of a stranger but in the truths that had yet to be revealed, truths about the curse, about the kingdom, and about the strange connection between him and the Omega. Lyra sensed the shift immediately. "Kale," she whispered, her voice low, warning him. He did not reply. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the darkness, searching for the source. Every instinct screamed caution, yet the bond between them held him in place, kept him tethered to the fragile hope that she represented. And then, as the wind shifted, carrying an unfamiliar scent, Kale realized that the first test of their bond had arrived. Not a battle of swords, but a challenge of hearts, wills, and the strength to face the unknown together. The wolf growled softly in his chest, an echo of the storm within. Lyra's hand remained on his arm, grounding him, calming him, yet daring him to leap into the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Kale's breath caught. He had survived countless battles, endured curses and betrayals, yet he had never faced anything like this. The power of trust, the danger of desire, and the fragile promise of redemption resting in the hands of a rejected Omega who could soothe the pain of a dying wolf king. And as the first stars appeared in the sky above Eldrin, he knew the path forward would not be easy. Shadows lingered on the horizon, and whispers of ambition, jealousy, and the ancient curse promised that the true trial was only beginning. Kale turned to Lyra, their hands still linked, eyes meeting in the darkness. "We will face it," he said, voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "Together." Yet neither of them could see what waited in the darkness beyond the ramparts, a presence watching, waiting, and calculating, intent on testing the Alpha King and the Omega who had dared to touch him. And in that quiet, electric moment, the world held its breath. Would the bond they shared withstand the coming storm? Could the Alpha and the rejected Omega navigate the dangers of a kingdom filled with ambition and the shadows of an ancient curse? Or would the wolf within Kale rise unchecked, threatening to destroy everything and everyone he had begun to care for? The wind carried a chill down the ramparts, and Kale's fingers tightened around Lyra's. Whatever awaited them, the first battle of trust, courage, and shadowed desire had begun. The dawn over Eldrin was pale and cold, the mountains shrouded in mist like silent sentinels guarding secrets older than memory. In the great hall of Valor Castle, Kale sat upon a stone bench, his shoulders hunched, the weight of the kingdom pressing down on him with every heartbeat. He had slept little, for the wolf within him stirred more insistently each night, clawing at his control, whispering in growls and instincts that threatened to drown the man he once was. Lyra entered quietly, her steps light on the cold stone floor. She carried a basket of herbs, simple gifts meant to calm and ground, yet even the familiar comfort of her presence brought a rush of unsteady longing to Cale's chest. She approached him carefully, eyes soft, observing the tension in his broad shoulders. "You did not sleep," she said gently. Cale shook his head. "The wolf, it grows restless. The curse," he paused, gripping the edges of the bench. "It is stronger than before. I feel it in every bone, in every breath. I do not know how long I can keep it contained." Lyra knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his, as if she could sense the turmoil inside him even before touching him. "Then let me help," she said. "Not to fix what cannot be fixed, but to share it with you. If the burden is lighter, perhaps the wolf will relent." Cale's gaze met hers, a mix of gratitude and fear flickering in his stormy eyes. "You risk too much," he whispered. "If this curse reacts to your touch, if it grows stronger instead of weaker, I cannot protect you." "I am not afraid of you," Lyra said firmly. "I have walked with fear my entire life. What matters is that we face this together." For a long moment they remained in silence, the only sounds the faint rustling of her skirts and the distant crowing of birds in the castle courtyard. Then tentatively she placed her hand upon his forearm. A warmth spread through Cale, not unlike the first time she had touched him in the forest. Yet this time the sensation was deeper, more potent, and a shiver of raw energy traveled along his spine. The wolf within him growled softly, uneasy with the intrusion, but it did not break. Cale inhaled sharply, the tension in his body easing slightly, the shadow of pain in his eyes softening. You are stronger than I imagined," he murmured. Lyra smiled faintly, her own pulse quickening. "And you are more than the wolf they see, more than your curse. You are still Cale, and I will not let that be lost." As the day passed, the castle outside their quiet sanctuary became a hive of tension. Whispers of Cale's weakening condition spread to those who hungered for influence. Rivals plotted in shadowed chambers, discussing alliances and opportunities. Among them was Lord Theron, a distant noble whose ambition had long surpassed his loyalty. He had watched Cale's decline with careful calculation, and now saw an opening, an omega near the Alpha King, a figure he believed could be used as leverage. Cale sensed the shifting tides before they came to light. The court was no stranger to deceit, but the knowledge that Lyra could be threatened added a sharp edge to his instincts. He paced the halls with the wolf gnawing at his control, muscles taut, senses alive. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, every sound a potential threat. Yet at the center of the storm, Lyra remained a calm anchor, the only certainty in a kingdom of shifting loyalties. That evening, the first true trial arrived. A messenger arrived at the gates of Valor, bearing news that a distant clan had sent envoys to challenge Cale's claim to the throne, using the rumors of his curse as justification. The halls buzzed with alarm as advisors debated the wisdom of immediate defense, while Cale's mind was only half on strategy. The rest focused on Lyra, the fragile bond between them, and the wolf that surged within him. Lyra stood by his side as he considered the message, her fingers brushing his, grounding him in ways neither words nor magic could. "We face this together," she said quietly. "Whatever comes, the wolf and the king are one, and we will endure." Cale nodded, but unease lingered. The wolf within him was no longer a silent companion. It stirred with a hunger for release, for strength, for survival. It whispered that the threats beyond the walls were minor compared to the storm he carried inside. And yet, the wolf did not fully dominate. Lyra's presence restrained it, her courage and touch a tether to the man Cale wished to be, the man he could be if the curse did not consume him. The night deepened, and Cale led Lyra to the castle garden, a quiet sanctuary beneath the stars. The scent of night-blooming flowers mixed with the cold stone and the distant forests, creating a cocoon of solitude. They walked slowly, the silence between them filled with unspoken words, longing and shared fear. "You are changing me," Kale said finally, breaking the silence. "Not with magic, not with command, but with your presence. I cannot predict what this means for the future, and yet I cannot let you go." Lyra looked up at him, eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "Then stay with me," she whispered. "Not as a king, not as a wolf, not as a cursed man, but as yourself. I will not fear what you are, only what we could lose." Kale's chest tightened at her words. The wolf growled softly in his mind, sensing the surge of emotion, sensing the bond that deepened with every passing moment. And yet, he did not retreat. Instead, he took her hand, intertwining their fingers, feeling a strength and unity that he had never known before. The first signs of the curse's intensity came later that night. Kale's body trembled unexpectedly, muscles tightening as the wolf surged within him. Lyra's hands were immediately on him, her touch steady, her warmth a shield against the dark currents that threatened to overwhelm him. "You must let it flow," she urged softly. "Do not resist, or it will break you. Trust me." Kale inhaled sharply, closing his eyes, and allowed her guidance. Slowly, the tension eased, the wolf's growl subsiding into a low hum of energy. He opened his eyes to find Lyra watching him with concern and admiration, the bond between them stronger than the fear that had haunted him. Yet the trial was far from over. At the edge of the garden, hidden among shadows, a figure observed silently, a messenger sent not from the kingdom, but from the distant clan plotting to exploit Kale's weakening condition. Every word, every touch, every bond they shared was being noted, every vulnerability recorded. Kale sensed the presence, his wolf growling low, but the figure remained hidden, careful not to provoke him. Lyra, unaware of the watcher, continued to soothe him, her hands steady, her eyes unwavering. The contrast was clear. Inside the sanctuary, warmth and hope; outside, cunning and calculation. The following days tested them further. Kale struggled with growing bouts of the curse, each wave of energy threatening to overwhelm his human form. Lyra remained by his side, her empathic touch the only thing keeping the wolf partially restrained. The court continued to murmur, nobles grew bolder, and the distant clan's threats loomed larger with each passing day. Kale and Lyra began to train together in small ways, not with swords but with meditation and control exercises that allowed Kale to sense and temper the wolf within. It was slow work, often frustrating, but every success strengthened their bond. They learned to communicate without words, to sense each other's fears and hopes, and to trust in ways neither had thought possible. One evening, Kale took Lyra to the edge of the forest where they had first met. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the trees and the distant mountains. "I have faced many battles," he said quietly, "yet none as difficult as this. To trust, to allow someone near, it terrifies me more than any enemy ever could." Lyra smiled, her hand finding his once more. "And yet you allow me. That is bravery greater than any sword." For a moment they stood in silence, the world around them forgotten. Kale felt the wolf stir, restless and aware, but Lyra's presence calmed it for now. And as they gazed at the horizon, the first signs of a larger threat became visible. Lanterns flickering among the distant trees, moving with deliberate purpose, bringing news that would force them to act together or apart. Kale's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension of the coming trial, one that would test not only his control of the wolf, but the strength of the bond they had formed. Lyra's grip on his hand was steady, unyielding, and for the first time he allowed himself to hope that together they could face whatever came next. But the shadows approaching were not ordinary messengers. They carried knowledge, intent, and a mystery that even Kale's senses could not fully read. The wolf growled low, sensing danger as Lyra whispered, "Whatever happens, we face it together." Kale nodded, heart hammering, aware that the true trial of trust, courage, and unity was only beginning. And as the first tendrils of threat reached the edge of the forest, the night held its breath, waiting to see if the Alpha King and the rejected Omega could withstand the coming storm. The sky over Eldrin burned with the light of dawn, though the air was thick with the tension of coming confrontation. Valor Castle stood like a silent sentinel, its towers casting long shadows over the land. Kale, the Alpha King, walked the ramparts, senses alert, wolf stirring within him, muscles taut with anticipation. Today would decide not only the fate of his kingdom, but the fate of his heart. Lyra followed, her steps quiet but resolute. The bond between them had deepened over the days of struggle. She no longer feared Kale, nor did she underestimate the wolf that lived inside him. She had learned to sense it, to soothe it, and to share in the burden that had haunted him for years. Together, they had forged a fragile peace, and together they would face whatever challenges awaited. "The clan from the north has arrived," Kale said, his voice low, calm, but carrying an undercurrent of warning. "They bring envoys and demands. They believe my weakness is enough to take what they desire." Lyra's hand brushed his, grounding him. "Then let them see that weakness is an illusion," she said softly. "The bond we share, it is stronger than any army." Kale nodded, feeling a surge of strength from her presence. The wolf within him stirred, curious and restless, but restrained by the calm and courage of the Omega who had claimed his heart. He had lived many years in control, commanding fear and respect, but this partnership, this trust, was unlike anything he had known. It was not power that mattered now, but unity, and in that unity lay hope. The gates opened and the northern envoys entered, banners trailing in the wind. Their eyes were sharp, measuring, seeking cracks in Kale's form, searching for weakness, yet they found none. Kale stood tall, shoulders squared, wolf restrained but present, his gaze steady and commanding. Lyra remained at his side, a quiet but undeniable presence that strengthened him in ways no sword or spell could. The lead envoy stepped forward, bowing but with a carefully concealed arrogance. "Alpha King," he said, voice smooth, "we have come to discuss terms. Your condition may influence your decisions. We trust wisdom will prevail." Kale's gaze met his, unwavering. "I am as whole as I choose to be," he said. "The bond I share with this Omega is my strength, and it shall not be questioned." The envoys whispered among themselves, unease growing. They had expected to find fear, weakness, or desperation. Instead, they found a king who commanded not only respect but quiet awe, and an Omega whose presence radiated calm authority. It was a display they had not anticipated, and for the first time, doubt entered their calculations. The wolf within Kale shifted, sensing both threat and opportunity. It had lived in shadow for years, feeding on fear and instinct, yet it now found purpose in the trust and touch of the Omega beside him. Lyra's fingers brushed his arm, and the surge of connection grounded him, tamed the restless power, and reminded him that he was more than curse or wolf. He was Kale, and he was not alone. The envoy's leader spoke again. "Your words are bold, Alpha King. Yet words alone do not secure a kingdom." Kale tilted his head, letting the wolf show itself just enough to remind them of the danger hidden beneath the human guise. A low, growling rumble vibrated in his chest, controlled but powerful, a warning that strength alone was not empty threat. Lyra's hand tightened around his. "You do not need to fight them alone," she whispered. "Together you are stronger." Kale's heart surged. He had faced countless foes, endured betrayals, and carried curses heavier than mountains, yet nothing had tested him like this. A combination of trust, courage, and unspoken understanding. The wolf obeyed her guidance, restrained and focused, drawing from the strength of the bond they shared. The envoy faltered. They had underestimated not just Kale, but the unity between the king and the Omega. The presence of Lyra was a quiet, undeniable force, impossible to quantify, yet impossible to ignore. It was the proof that Kale's power was not merely in strength, but in the choices he made and the bonds he honored. Yet even as this confrontation unfolded, Kale felt a deeper surge within, a trial unlike any he had faced. The curse, ancient and cunning, pressed against him. Memories of old failures, betrayals, and the shadow of the wolf threatened to overwhelm him. It clawed at his resolve, whispering that he could not endure, that the bond he cherished was fragile, and that his claim to the throne might crumble under pressure. Lyra sensed the shift immediately. Her touch steadied him, her gaze anchored him, and her presence reminded him of the choice he had made to trust, to love, and to embrace not only his human self but the wolf within. "You must face it," she said softly. "Do not resist. Accept it and it will not consume you." Kale inhaled deeply, closing his eyes. The wolf growled, testing him, but he focused on the Omega beside him, on the bond that had grown through trials, fear, and courage. Slowly, the internal storm began to settle. The curse, sensing the unity and trust, recoiled slightly, no longer an unstoppable force but a challenge that could be tempered with strength and connection. When he opened his eyes, the wolf's amber gaze within his own shimmered with controlled power, and Kale felt a clarity he had never known. The curse was not gone, but it was no longer the master of his fate. The man and the wolf were aligned, guided by the bond he shared with Lyra. The envoys, seeing this transformation, hesitated. Where they expected weakness, they saw strength. Where they expected fear, they saw calm and resolve. The subtle power of the bond between Kale and Lyra radiated through the courtyard, undeniable, commanding, and inspiring. The lead envoy swallowed hard. "It seems we misjudged the Alpha King," he said, voice faltering. "And the Omega who stands beside him." Kale's jaw tightened. "Then let it be known," he said firmly, "that Eldrin is whole and those who seek to divide it will find only unity. This bond is not a weakness. It is the strength of my reign, the power of trust, and the truth of what I am." Lyra's hand remained in his, the warmth and connection anchoring him, and together they projected a quiet, unstoppable force. The envoys bowed, their challenge unspoken but defeated in the presence of clarity, unity, and courage. As the northern messengers departed, the castle exhaled, the tension lifting like morning mist. Yet the true trial, the bond, the curse, and the lingering shadows of the wolf within, remained. Kale turned to Lyra, his eyes reflecting gratitude, awe, and something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel fully, vulnerability entwined with hope. "You have changed me," he said softly, his fingers brushing hers. "Not by healing, not by command, but by being here, by choosing to face the storm with me." Lyra smiled, her eyes shimmering. "And you have shown me that even the cursed, the broken, can be whole if they trust someone enough to let them in." For a long moment they stood in silence, the wind carrying whispers of the distant mountains, the castle, and the forests beyond. The wolf stirred quietly within Kale, no longer a threat but a reminder of the power that had once isolated him and now connected him to something greater than himself: love, trust, and the bond of unity. Kale's voice broke the silence. "I claim you," he said, his tone firm yet tender. "Not as possession but as a partner, not as prize but as equal. You are mine in the truest sense, by choice, by trust, by bond." Lyra's fingers tightened around his. "And I am yours," she said softly, "by the same bond. By the same choice, always." The kingdom watched as Kale and Lyra stood together, hands intertwined, eyes meeting with understanding and resolve. A new chapter began, not one of fear or curse, but of unity and hope. Eldrin was whole, not because the wolf was gone, but because it had been tempered by trust and courage. As the sun rose, bathing the castle in golden light, Kale felt the weight of the past lift slightly from his shoulders. The curse still lingered, subtle and watchful, but it no longer defined him. The wolf within was no longer a master, but a companion, and the bond he shared with Lyra was the anchor that would keep him balanced. The shadows of the past remained, whispers of ambition and threat, but Kale now faced them with clarity, strength, and the Omega who had touched not only his body but the deepest corners of his soul. Together they were unstoppable, not because they were unbroken, but because they had chosen to stand together, to trust, and to claim each other. The wind carried a gentle promise through the mountains and forests. The Alpha King and the rejected Omega had faced the darkness, tamed the wolf, and embraced the power of love, trust, and unity. And though the world would continue to test them, they had discovered a truth stronger than any curse or ambition. Some bonds could withstand anything. Kale exhaled, the tension finally easing from his body. The wolf rested, calm and alert, knowing it had found a companion as strong as itself. Lyra's touch lingered, warmth spreading through him, and he realized that together they could face anything, curse, ambition, or shadow. And as the first rays of sunlight lit the towers of Valor, Kale and Lyra stood side by side, their hands entwined, hearts aligned and spirits unbroken, ready to face whatever the future held together.